When darkness falls upon Lyrcy and nightmares take on form, 10 friends unite a shattered kingdom, and forgotten hope returns. That's just the back blurb for my book, Firebrand Red Horizon. And if you're here, I just want to say thank you so much. Um, this is going to be kind of one of those informal ones where I'm going to be reading part of my book and then talking about the influences behind the book. And it's kind of starting too with here's the actual book. So if you are interested, you notice that there's links in the comments for um, various Amazon places, Amazon US, UK, Canada, and Australia. These guys are literally all over the world. So it's kind of cool. But yeah, Firebrand. This is actually a book that I started a long time ago, approximately 10 years ago when I was in college. And what's really funny was that it was one of those books that I just kind of started on a whim. And then I was taking a creative writing class. And one of the cool things that my teacher said was that if you are writing a novel and you wanted to submit a chapter as part of a writing assignment and then turn that in, that would be perfectly acceptable. And so for this creative writing class, I did a couple stories and they were all good. And then I got to the last submission that I needed to do, and I just had a complete and total writer's block. And so I looked and I said, well, I got this novel that I'm working on, so maybe this will be something kind of cool. And so wrote up the first chapter and turned it in. And I was so surprised how much people actually liked it. There was a lot of really positive encouragement. There was a lot of really positive suggestions. I didn't get any, I think this is terribles, but I did have one girl that said that she was not a fan of any story that took place on the ocean, which mine kind of did. So, there's no pleasing everyone, but that's life. That's okay. And so, with this one, yeah, I did the first chapter, submitted it, and people liked it. My teacher liked it. She thought that there was a lot of really good stuff there, and that gave me the encouragement to just keep going and just keep figuring out and keep writing. What's even more interesting about this book is when I first started writing it, I didn't know where it was going to go. I just kind of went with it and just saw what was going on and just kind of let it take me where I wanted it to go. So this book has been so much of a discovering how to create stories more than just writing the book itself. And what's really cool is that as I was writing the book, as I was developing the characters, as I was figuring out what kind of things I even liked, what kind of things I wanted this book to represent, then the story kept on coming and then the plot kept on coming. So even though this one is book one, yeah, the whole story was meant to just be one single standalone book. I realized to tell the story that I really wanted, it's going to take a lot more. So, heads up, Firebrand, the first series, this one's going to be about 6 books total. Now, there's only 2 out right now. First book is, like I said, Red Horizon. Second book is Crimson Shore. And I personally like Crimson Shore even more than Red Horizon. So, definitely check those out. And then after that, I'm going to be doing another 4 books in the Firebrand series. I think that'll be enough to actually tell the whole story. Well, after Firebrand, we're going to jump forward about 20, 30 years, and I'm going to have a second series. I don't have a title for that one yet, but for that one, it's going to have the characters. They're going to be older. They're going to be like, they'll have come into their own. They won't just be trying to figure things out. They'll actually be there. And so you get to see them actually enjoying life properly. And the story is going to follow a younger generation of individuals. That's going to be about 5 books total in that one. Then the last series, this one's going to take place on a completely separate area, same world, but a different part of the world. And it's going to focus even further into the future than the first one. And the reason being, because I like to know how my characters end. I like to know what, because when you finish a series, you always feel like there could be more for the characters to do. You always feel that there's more story that needs to be told, and that's super frustrating. As I want to see that. I want to see that happen. So I'm literally writing series to allow you to see what happens to these characters at the end. And I'm going to be honest, it's so that I could see what happens to my characters at the end, because I love them. I care about them. So that'll be another 5-book series. So we're up to 16 now. I also really want to do one final book to end everything. I don't like the idea that there is just the end of the series, because then you always feel like there's a little bit more. So yeah, let there be a little bit more. And I'm going to have one final book that's going to be the end of the entire thing. But then flipping it back around, I really want to do a prequel, because I make a lot of references to some instances or some things that happen in the time before Firebrand. And I really think it'd be a lot of fun to bring those stories to light. I've already written some stuff in that area, and it's just a lot of fun. It's been a whole lot of fun with this whole process. So I will start in with, actually, I'm going to start in even before the book part with the maps. Now, the maps are actually kind of interesting, because I have been loving maps for all my life, and I was that nerd kid that would read an atlas at bed because I was just so fascinated by everything going on there. And so I've kind of developed my own style of map making. I've developed my own. Actually, I do have a couple tutorials on my channel. If you're interested in making your own maps, definitely check those guys out. But yeah, I love art and I love creating stuff. So created my own main city or main areas. The main continent is called Learcy. Then the main kingdom that we focus on for the first book is called Ildice. So once again, you see these guys here. And you'll notice that these maps are all kind of digital version. I actually went through and hand drew them originally before. Then with these next maps here, 9 Islands and 9 Islands in Community. This is actually where a lot of the beginning story takes place. My main characters, they're from a small island community area. And so a lot of the story is them kind of getting out of that, them seeing what the rest of the world has to offer, realizing that it's a heck of a lot bigger than their small community. This city, Kelevar, this is one of the main cities that they visit. They actually visit they actually visit a few other cities in the course of the series, but for the sake of this book, it's a lot of just going on in Eldice, because then with the second book, they travel to another nation, and they've got a lot of diplomatic relations going on with there. It's really, really cool. They see a lot more of the nation of Eldice, so again, a lot more stuff. And now, of course, I have to caffeinate with my Kaladi Brothers cup, because Kaladi Brothers is pretty much magic. Okay. So without further ado, that's a little bit of the backstory going on. And now, what's really funny about this first part that I'm going to be reading, it wasn't part of the original draft, but I'll get to that in a second. Chapter 1. A cold leather hand clamped hard over Mare's mouth, pinching his jaw and jolting him awake from his dreams. He struggled to rise, but the hand held him down, and cold fear seized him. He took a breath through his nose, then another, the icy air stinging his nostrils as his eyes shot open. But the world was dark. The world was empty. Is this what death feels like? He closed his eyes and opened hands that were clenched and shaking, and forced his breath to steady. He forced his mind to focus, for now was not the time to be paralyzed, he told himself. Here was not the place to be paralyzed. He opened his eyes once more to the darkened world that was cloudy and blurred. But soon his mind gave him clarity, and he remembered where he was. Chilled air watered his eyes, so he blinked to clear them, then focused his gaze further towards the hooded figure silhouetted against the haze. One of the figure's hands was pressed over Mare's mouth, but as he looked downward, he saw that the other clutched a long, shining blade. The figure stared down at him, the billowing of his cloak the only part of him that moved. Then he flicked his wrist, and the knife disappeared, dancing across a loose cloth before being silently sheathed. He brought a finger to his lips, and then the hand covering Mare's mouth withdrew, and Mare felt some of the tension leave. Mare sat up and looked around, barely making out the line that separated the rocky landscape from the heavens, and took a minute to massage his tired muscles. A low moan whispered along the tops of the peaks, and he shivered, pulling his own cloak tight against himself to block out the icy tendrils that always managed to find a crack. Behind him, a horse stamped, its hooves making a dull clamp, and then another, to signal that at least their horses had not abandoned them yet. "Rise, but use caution," a figure whispered. "We are not alone." "What do you mean, Onesh?" Mare asked, feeling a warmth spread through his body that quickly turned into a cold nod as the word settled. "A shadow stirs," Onesh answered. "The wind is troubled. We must ride quickly." "What's out there?" Mare asked through a tight jaw, taking care to pack his bedding as quietly as he could. He thought back to the night before when Onesh called him away from the group, saying too many bodies would cause too much unwanted attention. "We're too far west," Onesh said, almost to himself. "I may have made a mistake allowing you to accompany me, but my options were limited, you understand. Time is short. The others..." He trailed off, and the knot in Mare's stomach tightened further. "Onesh, what am I not seeing?" Onesh stayed silent, his head turned steadily, searching, but whether it was searching for the right words or something else, Mare could not say. He could hardly hear even his breathing, but when he finally spoke, his voice was grim, and Mare almost wished he hadn't. "Darkness returns to Ildes. The shadow moves against Lircy." And what's really cool, like I was saying, with this first part, it wasn't originally part of my initial draft. I actually started it in the next chapter. But during one of my creative writing classes, I was thinking to myself, man, I really want a way to kind of open up the world to the reader a little bit more. I want to take the reader away from the very small focus that I had with my main character, and I want to give kind of an idea of what the grand scheme of the world was. So I created a couple additional characters. Well, when I wrote this section up, naturally it was quite a bit shorter than what ended up happening because, I couldn't go into a whole ton of detail with creative writing classes, but people really liked it. They really loved, especially the character Onesh. And honestly, I really love this guy. And what's even more funny is that because there was so much interest in this guy, I actually ended up writing him into later parts and then creating much bigger stories involving him. And then I started to see all sorts of ways that he could interact with the main cast, and everything just grew. And again, this was just a one-off. This was not meant to be anything major. I don't even know if this was meant to be part of the book or if it was meant to be part of just a short story by itself. But either way, it grew into something considerably bigger, and it basically turned into a couple characters that I ended up really loving like crazy. Mare, what I really love about his character is I love the arc that he undergoes in these first couple of books, and I really love to see what ends up happening with him. And there was all sorts of debate with myself whether this character was going to live or die. So yeah, he's another of those characters that I just really grew to love, and I just really enjoyed. So continuing on. Onesh pressed hard as they rode along the peaks of the Truvana Mountains, trusting their steeds to understand the meaning of haste. The horses complied with the flight. Indeed, to Mare, the horses appeared to desire the speed even more than their riders, and it amazed him how Onesh was able to compel them so. Only when they crested a ridge some miles further and the silver moon broke through the haze did Onesh slow the horse's gait, but even then their pace was still quick. Mare did not mind. They continued eastward for a mile or so more, but due to the light, Mare could barely discern any landmarks or path, and so couldn't quite identify how far they'd traveled. His gaze darted around, occasionally glancing behind, but the gray horizon had long been playing with his sense of direction, and he couldn't even be sure how far they had gone from their main camp. The landscape changed little, save for the stones varying their shades of gray or height by a few meters, but otherwise there was nothing. Fortunately, it seemed to be enough for his partner. When they reached one ridge, they saw the faint puffs of smoke of their main scouting party's camp rising above the fog, casting an orangey glow that stood out like a beacon. So they turned their horses towards it and continued on. An outer guard nodded to them as they passed through the camp's perimeter, and once safe within the heated glow, Mare tried to relax. "Oi, where have you been?" one of the men around the fire called out. "Disappeared the other night, rode off into the fog." Onesh raised his hand. "Silence, young one. Not all the stones are without ears." "Not all the stones are without ears," the man snapped back. "What the blazes? Arlen, enough," another voice growled, and Arlen went silent. "Welcome back." Onesh dismounted and approached the speaker, a grizzled lieutenant who sported a patch over his eye. "Thank you, trio," Onesh greeted, clasping hands with them. "Alas, we have no time for pleasantries. I have a need to speak with you." "So, how'd the ride go with him?" Arlen greeted Mare, gesturing to an open spot by their small fire and extending to him a steaming cup of coffee after the two older soldiers went off on their own. Was he all doom and gloom, or did he actually smile for once? Did he keep talking about hunting the shadow? I see he still speaks in his lame. He smiles enough, another soldier, Barter, interjected. "At least I think so behind that mask. He may take things more seriously than most. He can be a little strange at times, but aren't we all?" "He seemed concerned," Mare answered, accepting the cup with shaky hands. And as he took a seat, he tried not to stare off towards his partner, or where his partner disappeared. He thought about mentioning the knife, which, truth be told, he had thought about a lot on the ride back. But Onesh had given no explanation, only rode harder, so he had no opportunity to ask. The thought came back more so now, and he could feel his heart start to race. But the thought of mentioning it to the men felt awkward and strangely pointless. Mare leaned in close to the warm flames. "So, what do you guys know about him?" "Not much is known about Onesh," Barter shrugged, poking the fire. "He showed up one day, before I was assigned here. Arlen would know more. He was his old partner." "Not much worth knowing," Arlen grumbled. "The man's crazy." "What do you mean?" Mare asked. Arlen shook his head, then gestured around him. "Look around you," Arlen answered. "There's nothing but rocks and sky and cold. There is nothing here that fool of a man keeps insisting there is. Even has a lieutenant believing his ways. The only thing of weight out here is us. There's never been anything more." "No life at all?" Mare asked. "Are you sure?" "Have you seen anything?" Arlen countered, laughing into the darkness. "And when you rode out with him, did you see anything?" "Gotta say, when you came into our patrol, I was very glad to be reassigned, and I'll just leave it at that." "What did he say is out there?" Mare asked, looking around for fear of the noise. "Or out there, or out. It doesn't matter, all right," Arlen snapped. "Just let it go. When you've seen as much as I have, you'll understand." They all jumped at Onish's words, no one having heard his approach. "Seen as much as you," Arlen scoffed. "How much could you have seen that I haven't? I know this land and the lands far beyond anyone has seen, even you." "If you say so," Onish chuckled, though not dismissively, gesturing his hand downward that surprisingly made Arlen hold back his next comment. He beckoned to Mare. "Come, join me for a little walk, and stretch your legs after that ride. Let us talk." Mare stepped away from the comfort of the fire to join his partner, unsure of his thoughts. Still, he followed, and felt an odd sense of peace he didn't feel around the others. They didn't seem to go anywhere specific, but once they had put a little distance between themselves and the group, Onesh stopped and put a hand on his shoulder. "Forgive me if I startled you earlier," Onesh said lightly, his voice gentle and soothing. People tend to wake loudly, and I don't like to take chances I don't have to. What was out there? Mare asked, feeling the tightness of his muscles leaving. What had you nervous? Nervous? Onish began, and then chuckled. No, not nervous, though I can see how you see it as such. Excited would describe it better. I sense one of my old foes has returned after many years, and with his return marks the return of something far greater, far more wonderful, far more fantastic. I'm sorry, old memories have a way of resurfacing, especially as of late. I was hoping we could have a moment to talk of other things. There are answers I must have. Your name is Mare, and you're a sergeant, correct? Yes, sir, Mare answered. 5th year in the service. Onesh paused, his hands momentarily closing as his shoulders slumped. He looked out across the mountains, his eyes glazing over, and he let out a slow breath through a thin smile before turning back to Mare. Ah, wonderful, Onesh said, though you may drop the sir with me. I abandoned my titles years ago, as they are not of any use to me here, and I haven't been that person for a while. There are not many of us here, mind, and there's only so much work you can give a private before it becomes faster to do it yourself, so we've learned to deal. I see, Mare said, smiling at Onish's easy speech and less than stoic demeanor. He studied the man who had pulled down his traditional hood and scarf, and noted hard lines marking leathery skin as the light gave the man's hair a silver shine. Begging your pardon, then, but what rank did you hold, if I may ask? I was once a captain, he answered softly. A leader of thousands, but like I said, that was a long time ago, when I was a different person, a different role. But on the note of role, what brought you up here? Requested transfer, Mare answered, shrugging, and Onesh nodded. I started off in Asard as part of the city guard, though I requested escort duty often, so I got to travel a lot. I even made it to Kelevar for a time. I've seen the cities, country, rivers, forests, coastland, and flatland of Ildiz, and I got to know some small towns and villages too. But then I had a crazy idea of wanting to be up in the mountains. Mare paused, grinning sheepishly. Actually, I was kind of fascinated by everything in the stories, all the legends of the mountain guardians and the riches to be found. In reality, though, it's not what I hoped. So tell me about your dreams. My dreams? Mare asked, taken aback. He felt his hands start to shake and a burning in his cheeks despite the cold. Yes, your dreams, Onesh continued. Or perhaps tell me the whole truth. There is more to your story than just wanting a change. Something happened, didn't it? Well, yes. Who were they? Who was who? The person you couldn't save. How? I've seen too much over the years, Onesh answered softly, laying a strong hand on their shoulders. Some of it was wonderful, but far more was not. I do not know everyone's experiences, but one thing I have seen in everyone is pain. With that pain always comes a story, especially with the nightmare I heard you haunted by. So now I ask, why have you come up here? It's a long story, Mare sighed dismissingly, hoping to end conversation there. My story is already long, Onesh chuckled, but gestured openly for Mare to continue. I have time to add a few more pages to it. Why do you care about what I have to say? Mare asked, raising his eyebrows and cocking his head to the side. You barely know me. Besides, it's not a happy story to tell. I care because it's real, Onesh replied, and I care because a person's life is always worth caring about. You're right, though. I don't know you, so I understand why you don't trust me. But if we're to ride together, I'd like to know who I'm partnered with. All right, well, I'll make it short, Mare said, crossing his arms and shaking his head. Because the long version is, well, I had a partner once. His name was Gethin, and he was the sergeant in command of my squad. At first, we were stationed in Maltus, but reports of brigands outside of Gangberg required the two of us to be transferred. Gangberg was nice. It was small, but people were always coming and going, so something was always happening, and most of the people were fine and gave no trouble. Once in a while, a few would try, but they were stopped without much of an issue. Well, on that day, I was watching the gate when a group from outside approached. I followed procedure and called for reinforcements, but when they rushed and breached the gates, I froze. I couldn't draw my sword, and they took advantage. Mare went quiet as old thoughts flooded back. He turned away, and whether it was so Onesh couldn't see his eyes or he couldn't see Onesh's, he wasn't sure. His chest tightened, and his stomach suddenly disagreed with the coffee he was drinking. But in his head, the accusations started to come. People were running, he said quietly, forcing the words out. Screaming, but I couldn't move. Before my sword cleared my scabbard, they were in the city. The other guards fought well, and the brigands were killed, but Gethin... I transferred to Kelevar a couple weeks later to join the city guard, but nothing felt right. As one of the few survivors, I was branded a hero, but it ate at me constantly. I couldn't connect with anyone, couldn't get my failure out of my head, so I transferred here. Figured that out here, I wouldn't be able to let anyone down. People say I'm crazy for wanting to come out to this cold, barren place, but the way I see it, it's nothing less than I deserve. Onesh nodded, the hard lines of his face softening. The loss of a comrade is never easy, Onesh said gently. I've seen many people fall through my years. Some fell as the result of my failure. It's not easy to live with, I know, but we live because our time has not yet come. So neither has yours. Also, he added, almost as an afterthought, I wouldn't dismiss the stories. Oh, was that what brought you up here? Mare asked, grateful to turn the conversation away from himself. A long time ago, Onesh answered. You could say that in a matter of speaking. But you believe in the stories, Mare pressed. Not the stories as they are told now, Onesh replied, but the original stories. Oh yes, I believe in them completely. Mare bit its lip. Is that why Arlen calls you crazy? Onesh gave a long, slow nod as a smile tugged at his mouth, and his eyes shone with a silver gleam. That's one of the reasons, but allow me to explain. Arlen sees what is before him and believes that is what is. He does not question it and has no imagination for what could be. To him, the stories are just that, stories. But to me, they are history, not fiction, and the people in them, all existing, all real. I look at the stories and see them also as what people can be, for good or bad. Not a bad way to think, Mare acknowledged. At least they ended well. Good endings are not overrated. Have they ended well, though? Onesh probed. Because there is one part that is never in any story, although everyone seems to think it is. I can't think of one, Mare said. The last great battle ended 1,000 years ago when the Dark Lord was stopped, further north near the northern edge of Abaven. The war was long, resulting in more casualties than the sum of any other wars combined, but it ended. Alliances were made that have held since then, with trade maintained between Eldis and Baven, and we've enjoyed peace with the exception of ordinary conflicts. What was left out? At no point was the Dark Lord killed. Mare shook his head and brought his hand up to massage his neck. He thought through all the lore and stories he had read, through all the logic, and found himself coming up empty. He had to have been, Mare concluded after a moment. After the last battle, his tale ends. History goes on without any mention of him. He was finished. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, young one, Onesh stated. We know he was stopped, but while there's no mention of his continued existence, there's no mention of his death or demise either. Arlen believes that when the Dark Lord was stopped, he was likewise destroyed, and that not being mentioned in the history books since is the proof of that. Which makes sense, Mare said, nodding, but continue. I know otherwise, Onesh answered, but let me ask you, since we're away from the others, what do you believe? To be honest, I'm not sure now, Mare answered, shaking his head. I mean, historically, I know the Dark One came from the west, which people say is just wasteland and desert, though that never made sense to me. We have outposts, after all, and our past lords had their reasons for establishing them and keeping them. I know Ildis and Ebaven have had trouble with others who reportedly came from beyond the mountain, but they're men like you and I, not creatures of darkness. If I must take a side, however, I'm sorry, but along with the Adenari, they had to have all died. Ah, the Adenari, Honesh said approvingly, with no sign of discomfort at Mare's differing opinion, which Mare respected him for. If anything, there seemed a definite affection coming from the speaking of that name. I wondered if they would be mentioned. If I may, I must ask, what are they to you? Heroes, Mare said, feeling his heart start to rise and chills go down his back. The war ended because of them. They fought with the strength of 10 men and could fight on with dozens of arrows sticking out of them at once. They were wise as well as intelligent and taught the people of Lyrcy to fight the dark. They died for us too. Mare trailed off, but Onesh waited for him to finish. They died for us, but their sacrifices brought about the Dark Lord's defeat. I have mixed feelings about all that, if you know what I mean. I do know, Onesh said, laying a hand across his chest. There were many names listed among the fallen, many fine names among the Grey Wardens, the Hunters, the Black Company, the Netherians. Well, I am pleased to see that you have a respect for the histories, which is more than can be said of some of the others. At the least, I feel comfortable riding at your side, and I look forward to our time together. I shall let you go now, lest the others think you have become as crazy as I am, for I must tend to my horse. Take care. Hold a moment, Mare said, breaking free from what almost felt like a trance. He stared hard into Onesh's face. You asked all your questions. Do I not get any? Onesh laughed, his warmth dissolving the cold knot of uncertainty in Mare's stomach. That is fair, Onesh replied, bowing his head. I apologize. What would you like to know? Well, Mare began, stumbling over his words. I don't really know much about you, and neither does anyone else for that matter. If you care to learn, Onesh answered. I'm not secretive, but I don't always need to tell everyone everything about my life. Well, you've probably figured I don't have anyone significant in my life, Mare said. Do you have anyone? I used to, Onesh said, his smile gentle and warm, yet his eyes glistened in a way that caused Mare's throat to tighten. A long time ago. She died. Well, she was killed, actually. Oh, I'm sorry, Mare replied. It's all right, Onesh assured him. She lived a good life, an honorable life. I will see her again in this world or the next. I'm confused, Mare said. If you believe the stories, Onesh began, then remember the stories. If you believe Amiran conquered before, because the stories say, then believe he will again, because the stories say. Hold a moment more, if you will, Mare asked. Onesh paused. For a moment, the commander he used to be. No, Mare said to himself quickly. The soldier the man still was. Something's been giving me pause. You call me young one, as if I were a child, and though I'm only 3 years past my 20th, I'm not that young. Also, you speak of your time as long ago, but frankly, you don't look much older than the lieutenant, who's only in his mid-40s. My question then, if you don't mind, of course, how old are you? Onesh chuckled. I don't like to talk about my age. I'm youthful enough to keep going, old enough to know my going may end soon, and while I'll call myself an old soul, I refuse to call myself old. Will that suffice? Not at all, Mary answered back. But then, with the strength given from his conversation, he dared himself to speak more. But I suppose it will do for now. I'd like a straight answer to the next question, though. Something was out there today, wasn't it? Something more than just shadows. Yes, Onesh answered. His tone was not dismissive, but there was a severity that concerned Mare. What will you, or will you tell me what? Mare asked. After a moment passed enough for Mare to know Onish wasn't going to continue. You already know, Onish said. Mare bit his lip. What about the Adnari? He asked. You reacted to that name. What are they to you? Onish's smile twitched at the corners, and in the old man's eyes, Mare could see pain, but also a joy indescribable. They are special, Onish said after a time, and ones I owe my life to. So one thing that I've really loved with the writing with this one, I love Mare and Onesh's dynamic. I just really love the idea of having this much older soldier that becomes a mentor to a considerably younger kind of fresh blood. And I've really loved having that kind of dynamic play into things. Now, one really cool thing that I've also loved really doing is I love playing off of the kind of air of mystery and the way that he's, generally speaks. And again, this is another thing that I just threw a couple lines just to kind of have some fun. And when I brought them to my creative writing groups for various critique and all that stuff, people really loved it. People genuinely liked the way that he spoke and the way that he presented. And so I just kind of kept that. So if you're someone that's actually writing a book right now, pay attention to what people are saying. It's one thing to write a story and have a really awesome idea in your mind, but if other people don't find it interesting or if they find things that would be considerably better, listen to them. They're going to be your audience. You've got to love what you do, but at the same time, if you want people to read it, then you got to write stuff that people are going to want to read. So when people tell you things like, hey, I really like the way that you did this character, definitely keep that. Remember, that is a good thing. That is something that you can take with you. If people say, I really was not getting this, or I really was not feeling this, or this section just didn't quite work, again, listen to them. There are sometimes ways that you can take what you have and work it into another part. Sometimes you don't want to include something because it now needs to be background information that will appear later on. B, it just belongs in a separate spot. Or C, maybe it's just not even necessary at all. You'll note that as we're talking, sometimes I ramble. Well, if this were edited down, I'm pretty sure a lot of my voice would be cut out because, yeah, you just don't necessarily need everything. So that's life. Well, what's funny about this next part is it actually goes into a little dream sequence that Mare experiences. And this particular dream sequence was actually in a lot of the original drafts. It was brought all the way to the front, and it was actually the opening of the book. Well, again, listening to people, a lot of people say they don't like dream sequences at the very beginning. It just kind of takes them out. I thought, you know what? Rather than go into it as a dream, why not just wake up or start the whole thing with the dude being woken up directly, throws immediately into the action, throws immediately a possible concern, but I still really liked the dream sequence. I really liked showing that this was something that he was going through. And so I thought, what if I just put this in another section? And following this bit, there's another moment of, boy, soldier, wake up. So it clearly implies that they went to sleep and then he woke up shortly after. So I thought, it would actually work so much better to put this dream sequence here. Not only to show that this is a dream that he did have, but that this is a reoccurring dream. So we saw a reference to when Onesh was asking about his dreams, asking about the one he couldn't save. Now we see that dream itself. If we had started the whole thing with just that dream, then it could just be he was experiencing that at that time. It was a one-off, go from there. But by moving the dream to a separate section, I think it shows that this is his constant state of mind. And I think it really helps to, kind of have Mare's character established earlier on. And then now we kind of see the reason why. Again, talking to people say, hey, I don't like to have this in this spot. And then you change it. People like it. So, yeah, it's the same stuff. It's the same material. I get to keep what I like. But again, people have their thoughts. And like I said, too, with the girl who didn't like ocean stories, I can't really do much with that. You just kind of have to accept that some people are not going to be your audience. That is perfectly fine. But sometimes just changing a simple little thing is going to make your audience love things even more. So it's perfectly cool to change things. But diving into the next part, Mare averted his eyes from the figure taking form before him. As before, he was alone in a world of darkness and silver fog. No landmarks, no light, save that the fog appeared to make its own light. Even his own form was shadowy, though it was difficult to feel he was even there. Their blood is on you. The words echoed around him as the fog swirled and dispersed. Mare watched it collect again, and then it started taking on multiple forms. He recognized people, buildings, a sword, a banner, a generic soldier, a wall. His blood is on you. The fog took on one more form, the one he hated the most, who stared at him with eyes empty yet with tears. What good was your sword? The voice said again, speaking through the familiar figure. What good was the soldier when the soldier failed? What good will the soldier be now? Why are you here? Mare closed his eyes, fighting the pain, but the grief was too strong, even in this world. He was tired, so very tired. He was tired of fighting his memories, tired of fighting his past, tired of fighting the hopeless walk of looking for hope in a world of darkness. He knew the truth. It would always return, and he was done. I'm here for one reason, he answered. I am here to die. Oi, soldier, on your feet. A rough kick to Mare's side snapped his eyes open from where he lay by the dead but still smoking fire. His eyes widened as he looked up at the hazy figure that stared down at him with an eye that seemed to shine like molten amber. His hand leapt for his sword, but it was regrettably just out of reach. Horse's hooves stamped outside of his vision, and a low whistling around him brought back memories and the feelings of the mountains. When the dream world finally cleared, he was able to recognize Lieutenant Trill as he stood holding his large double-edged sword casually across his shoulders, and gulped. Yes, sir, Mare answered crisply, taking care to keep his voice lowered. He rubbed his side, debating whether he preferred the rude awakening to the gloved hand from the night before, and decided that regardless, he'd be wearing his armor to sleep with him the next night. Thankfully, standard armor out here meant leather, for although it was not as strong as the chain or plate he usually wore in the cities, its weight gave it greater ease of movement. It retained more warmth too, and it was quieter, and on the days he was sure a voice whispered in the wind, the silence gave him comfort. He tried to don his gear quickly, but fumbled at the straps with fingers that were already stiffening from the chill wind, and once stunned, cast his cloak over it all to trap in as much warmth as possible. The sky was clear and pitch black, and stars covered the expanse, but a silver fog rolled along the ground, distorting the landscape below knee level. The effect unnerved him, but he stayed silent. You don't complain about the dark, Lieutenant Trill growled, extending a hand to pull Mare to his feet. He gave him a quick nod. Good. I hate whiners. It's dark in the city, sir, Mayor answered simply. At least here you can see the stars. The cold may prove to be a problem, though. Trill let out a grunt. The cold is always a problem. It's the only thing you can count on. Winter's almost here, too. We'll be getting snow soon, so congratulations. You're just catching the last of the warm season. Comforting. Thank you, sir, Mara said. Trill shrugged. You get used to it. You hate it, but you get used to it. How long have you been stationed here, sir? Mara asked, rubbing his hands together and breathing into them to get some feeling back. Long enough, Trill chuckled. 9 months between Tilgal and Posmer. I'll put in a transfer to Chanos one of these days, where I'll have some days of warmth and real sun. But for now, I'll pass the time keeping you all out of trouble. Do you see any trouble up here, sir? Mare asked. Just the usual kind, Trill replied. Soldier forgets to pack enough rations and has to go without for a day, or a private doesn't have warm enough gear and has to be sent back to the outposts. Once in a while, you get someone who just can't handle it out here, which is why you came in. Do people have to be transferred out often? Mare asked. Often enough, Trill sighed. I've not known any who have stayed a full deployment, save for Onish, and he's been here longer than I. Do you think there's something out here, like Onish? Mara asked hesitantly. There are many mysteries still out there, Trill replied, staring out towards the west. But enough small talk. Get the men up. We ride back to Tilgal once everyone's saddled. Report to Onish when you're done. You're riding with him again. After Mare had aroused the others, he looked around and found Onish was missing. Remembering the comment made the previous night about the horses, he went to the little outcropping their mounts were tucked into and found Onish standing alone. When he crept closer, he could hear the man muttering. There would be a pause, but then the muttering would continue, as if he were talking to some silent companion. Mare inched closer and looked around, but oddly, no one was around save their steeds. Onish? Mare said hesitantly. The man looked up. Trill wants everyone mounted. He said to report to you two. As I thought, Mare replied. Good. I spoke with him earlier. Since you appreciate the stories, I hoped you would accompany me on a small side trip on the way back. Of course, Mare said. He wanted to say something about the man's muttering, but wasn't sure how to phrase it, so he let it stay, especially when Onish smiled. Perfect, Onish said warmly. Thank you. You're welcome, Mare said curiously, shaking his head as he walked away. He rejoined the main group, finding his swords where he had left them, and buckled them on. Onish came leading his horse, and then spoke with Trill as the others went to collect their mounts. Trill nodded and the two clasped hands. Then he turned and gave the orders to ride. Within minutes, the company set forth, leaving behind nothing but a charred fire pit. Though the sky had colored from inky black to blue, darkness still saturated its expanse as they rode back to Tilgal, galloping through the sea of fog that swirled at their feet. The wind stilled its whispers, leaving the air quiet save for the steady rumbling of the horses' progress, and no one saw it necessary to interject their voices into it. As they rode further, the sky lightened into a steel blue, and then abruptly, Onish reined his horse next to Maris. We turn west here, Onish stated, breaking off from the group. Mare turned his horse to follow. It was hardly even a path they were on, Mare thought, realizing he could barely see anything even with his partner leading the way. But Onish seemed sure, and if anything, his pace quickened. They rode through a rolling plateau of stony hills and came to a stop at the base of a small ledge. We're here, Onish said as he dismounted, and walked to the unnaturally flat ledge. Come, look here. The ledge was the same color gray as the landscape, but when Mare dismounted, he noticed the floor had been laid, as with brick, not flattened by weather or some other natural occurrence. He bent down to study the stones and saw intricate detail, but of a style he had not seen before. It was a graceful and elegant artsmanship, but still practical, a perfect blend of beauty and practicality. He looked up across the stonework, and then he saw a small tree standing by itself, surrounded by raised stones. What am I looking at? Mare whispered, his eyes transfixed on the small plant with white flowers and dark green leaves. He studied the flowers closely, noting how they had 6 teardrop-shaped petals that were also maroon and gold close to the base. He noted, too, the way the leaves were the same shape, yet slightly larger, and felt oddly thick. He took a deep breath, and the aroma of grass and the morning dew, cedar, and garden lilies assailed his senses all at once. And how is this possible? It's not so much what you see, Onesh answered, but what it represents. This tree, the graceless tree, is one of the few of its kind that exists beyond Adonar. They are hardy and are said to grow far greater when the conditions are right. They are said to survive anywhere. I've heard of it, Mare nodded. I read a story about how one of these was brought over to turn the tide in the war, but I never understood how a tree could do that. Is this that tree? No, that tree is elsewhere, Onesh replied. However, stand up and look at the rocks. On each of the stones at the base, you can still see the impression of names carved here. Furthermore, if you step back, you can see a speared dragon, Mare exclaimed. The mark of Adonar, the symbol they carried upon their banners. Caution with too much noise, Onesh said in a low voice. But you are right. The place was once a guard post used during the last war. Some of us still keep it. To think, Mare remarked, bending closer to the engraved stones and touching their surface gently. Almost 1,000 years old, and I can still see. Wait, Onesh whispered sharply, causing Mare to tense and turn quickly. From seemingly nowhere, an ornate bow had materialized in Onesh's hand, and an arrow already sat nocked, though it remained undrawn. Onesh rose to his full height, his coloring almost as gray as the stone, and Mare found his limbs unable to move. Onesh turned slowly, looking in Mare's direction, and now his face was chiseled in hard intensity, with lips grim and eyes blazing. Then, as Mare tried to move his hands to the hilts of his swords, Onesh raised the bow, pulled back on the string, and aimed straight at Mare. There you are, my old foe, Onesh whispered with glee. Let us dance. Coffee break. Yeah, it's funny. I'm a substitute teacher also, and sometimes I'll be reading a story or a poem out loud or something, and it's like, crap, gotta get the throat good. And of course, I have to pause at a moment that was, pause worthy. So, Onesh, Mare choked, his voice cracking as a new unknown fear struck him. Onesh is me. It's Mare, your partner. Arlen's words echoed in his head, and the revelation that they were right pounded in his head. Just put the bow down. Do not fear, Onesh said calmly. Now you shall see. Onesh, Mare began, and then Onesh burst forward. Leonardo, Onesh roared as his arrow jumped free, passing inches to the side of Mare's throat, and a guttural yelp rose from just behind him. He turned, but a dark mass fell upon him, sending him to the stones below, and the hot stench of rotting flesh and wet fur filled his head. His senses dulled, but he vaguely sensed a pack of some animals descend upon them, and from seemingly far off, he heard a terrified scream. Then he saw a gray figure leap among the beasts. Their knives flashed and danced, seeming to glow from their own inner light. Another figure appeared in the fray, also gray-clad and indistinguishable, but this one had a pair of swords in his hands. The weight grew heavier as another body fell upon him, and he struggled to breathe. Pushing hard, he barely managed to shift them to the side, and then it was another struggle to free his legs. After a few more heavy breaths, his vision cleared. What? Kithral, and voice not Onesh's hissed. Mare turned quickly and saw a man dressed in shining plate mail with a pair of broad, curved swords strapped to his back. The man appeared normal, despite not being there a few moments ago. But there was a strange power and authority that radiated from his being. When Mare looked into his eyes, he froze again, for the man's eyes glowed with a golden light. A hard smack across the head cleared his daze. "Who are you?" Mare asked, recovering from Onesh's blow and taking care not to stare too much. "I am Leonardo," the man said grimly, but not unkindly, inclining his head. "But we have too little time for proper introductions, so listen carefully. Malgalon is ready, or very close to, if we see his more vicious servants. It is possible that his boldness is premature, but I would not put too much trust in that, for he is crafty and knows well how to sow the seeds of chaos, destruction, and war." "Malgalon?" Mare asked, his mind racking itself over for recognition. "You call him the Dark One," Leonardo replied. "But who are you?" Mare asked once more. "And where?" "His kind go by many names, through many legends," Onesh interrupted, rising from where he was inspecting the tree. "They are the Vigil. Though they protect us and fight the shadow, this one has also been my friend for many years, and on this trip has taken the form of my horse. You know the stories, so remember what you know." "Remember quickly," Leonardo commented. "We were lucky, but I suspect your friends are in trouble. They are, unfortunately, only human. Prepare yourself, then, for they may already be gone." "He's right," Onesh said, as Leonardo's form took that of a horse once more. He swung into the saddle that materialized with the form. "Hurry, mount up." "But," Mare protested. "Now," Onesh ordered, and Mare found himself compelled to obey. They thundered off in the direction of the other men, riding against biting wind, and Mare's eyes stung. The landscape was nothing but a blue-gray blur, the sun not yet rising above the horizon, and the moon failed to cast much light, but it was enough. Roars of carnage and cries of pain began to rise in the distance, and Onesh spurred them on farther. An icy chill seized Mare's stomach, almost causing him to rein in his horse. Somehow he made himself follow Onesh. He hated it, but he knew his duty. The last ridge rose before them, one final barrier between him and his patrol, but in his heart Mare knew what he would see. In his mind he was back at the city gates, back on the blood-stained ground. His sword cleared its scabbard, but then the darkness took him. Arrows whistled forth from Onesh's bow. Leonardo, in human form once more, had his swords drawn and danced through the crowd of beasts that had been previously devouring the last of the men in Mare's patrol. Roars of victory cried out from the beast as Arlen was cut down and his body ravaged along with the others. Barter held on a little longer, but then his sword arm was hacked off, and then his legs. He looked over at Mare, pleading. Yet try as he would, Mare could not move. Once again he could only watch, and as he stood lifeless, his sword fell from his hand. One still remained, looking little more than a blur of silver. His blade swung swiftly and wildly, shining bright and unstained as it cut through the blackened terror. The man was a storm, yet the wielder remained calm. "Trill," Mare choked out, feeling some hope, but in that moment Trill's blade faltered, and a black blade slipped past his defenses to plunge into his side. He roared in pain, swinging backward to cleave the beast's head, but then he too dropped his sword and fell to his knees. Leonardo was by his side in an instant, defending his fallen body, and then quickly, so quickly Mare thought visions had clouded his sight, Leonardo was not. In his place, a creature, beautiful yet terrifying, rose on long clawed legs and let out its own roar of challenge. The creature reared its massive head attached to a long muscular neck, snapping hard against black steel and proving the stronger. Its tail lashed out, sending black figures flying, and its front claws ripped across flesh as easily as if it were water. Great wings opened on its back, 2 pairs of majestic feathered beauties, though the creature would not take flight. Onish strode towards Trill, calmly loosening arrows into the angry beasts that were more focused on the other creature and causing one after another to drop. Mare tried again to move, but a dark figure crashed into him, sending him to the ground again. He met Onish's eyes, seeing a man more terrifying than the beasts, and then when Onish shot two more arrows at his way, he closed his eyes. Two dull thuds and dying growls sounded just behind him, and when he looked back, he saw two more dark forms lying still. He closed his eyes again, biting back the tears of shame, and after a few more moments, everything went quiet. "They're all dead now," Onish said gently. Mare heard him approach, and then strong hands lifted him to his feet. Leonardo was in his human form once more, and he was moving through the bodies to check for survivors. "I couldn't do anything," Mare managed. Again. "No," Onish said, shaking his head. "But very few can even stand in their presence, let alone draw a sword against them, for it takes more than courage to stand in their presence. You felt it before on the ledge, and then you felt it before cresting that ridge. They exude terror. It's over now, regardless." "You should have let them kill me," Mare said. "You should have let me die. Look at me. I'm nothing. I let Gethin die. I let these men die. I should have done something, but I didn't. What good is my life to anyone?" Onish bowed his head, and Mare saw his eyes water. "One of the worst tragedies I've seen in all my years is a man who feels he has no more worth, because when they feel that way, they decide their life is done, and so choose to end it themselves. We are in this world for only a fleeting time, some longer than others, but every life has a purpose. Every action, every situation creates the person we are, and if we let the moment break us, then we lose every good that can come from it." Mare looked up at Onish, but the man had his gaze downward, and his fists were clenched. His mouth was drawn into a grimace, and then his shoulders sagged. "What's done is done," Onish spoke quietly. "We cannot change it. All we can do now is decide how to go forward. Come, there is one you must speak with." "Who?" Mare asked hesitantly. "Not one of the creatures." "Mare," Trill choked. "Lieutenant, sir," Mare said, collapsing next to him. Warm tears flowed, and a wave of giddiness spread through him. "You're still alive. Not all is lost." "Mare, my body is broken," Trill said, his eyes closing and his small grin lighting his face. "My battle is done. This is it for me." "Trill, Lieutenant, I'm so sorry. I don't have time for apologies," Trill coughed. "I need you to listen. Our deepest fears have come to light, and word must reach the High Lord's ears that darkness has taken form once again. He must know what to prepare for, if any preparations can be made." Trill took a deep labored breath. "Our men deserve a proper burial," he continued, "and their families deserve to learn of their fate from one of their own. You're their voice now, Mare. You are our voice now." "Sir, you're gonna make it." "Be quiet and let me finish," Trill growled before coughing up a mouthful of blood. "The dead have no use for their weapons, so my sword I leave to you. It's spilled more blood than I can measure, but I foresee that there is much more that will need to be shed before it can be laid to rest." "I can't," Mare choked. "Sir, I don't deserve this. I couldn't do anything." "Then do something now," Trill whispered. "And if you should fall, pass it to someone you call worthy." Trill looked over at Onish. "Farewell, Master Onish. It has been an honor serving, far more than one like me deserves." "Trill," Mare cried as the man's eyes closed, and he felt a hand upon his shoulder. "Trill is dead," Onish said gently, "and we've lingered here for too long. Leonardo, please help us with the bodies." "They grow bold," Leonardo growled as he worked, his hands tightening into stony fists when they didn't hold one of the patrolmen. "They've been given permission to pass." Indeed, Onesh replied. This is far more than the few daring individuals I've disposed of before. This was planned, coordinated, between multiple packs. I counted 8 bodies earlier at the grave, and I see maybe 20 here. Could any have escaped? Mare asked, wiping tears and regaining his composure. Are there more out there? There are many more out there, Leonardo answered as Onish went among the men, bending down to study Barter curiously. But a fatal flaw of Kithral is that they will not retreat, but that works in our favor. They are relentless, they keep attacking until either there is no one left to attack, or they're all dead. Great praise I give to Lieutenant Trill, the Shadowbane, for if he had fallen before our arrival, the beasts would have invaded Eldis, and eliminating them would have been far more difficult. Even worse, had they made it past the mountains, I would have been unable to follow. But you're one of the Vigil, Mare exclaimed. You fight the Shadow. Surely you would have been able to find them again. Find, but not fight. Not in Lircy, Onish said. And Marion granted them charge of the borders, but only there. They were not to set foot in the lands to the west, Malin, nor were they allowed to draw arms in the east. Yes, even they are not without rules, but if you can believe it, those rules are for our benefit as much as for theirs. Now come, we have tarried too long. We have work to do now, and then more to do later. We will pile the Kithral in one place to burn, but we will build a mound over our friends, for we cannot carry them out. Trill will be buried in a grave of his own. He will be laid to rest with the weapons of his fallen foes, like the heroes of old. He's earned that. Mare's hands shook as he worked. His limbs had grown numb, though not from the cold, and a haze seemed to cloud his vision. His new sword weighed him down, its charge more burdensome than its mass, and the stench of the bodies threatened to make his stomach retch. When he could focus, every face seemed to stare at him, either with accusations or hatred, so he closed the eyes of the men. When he approached the Kithral, though, and looked down at them, their dead eyes threatened to devour his very will. He tried to focus elsewhere, but their yellow fangs seemed to wish for his throat, and their long black claws threatened to close around an arm or a leg and rip into fragile flesh. He settled for closing his own eyes, but even that barely let him work. Stones were placed reverently over the bodies of the scouting party. They built the mound high, taking care to place each rock so as to not mangle the corpses further. And then Onesh took out a wineskin and poured the contents over them. Trill's body was placed in a crick in the rock, a collection of blackened swords forming a base, and when they completed their task, they poured oil and the last of their dry wood on the mound of the black beasts and set it ablaze. The smoke rose high, tainting the clouds. That is it then, Leonardo said with a nod. I must tell Mikhail quickly so we can prepare. And my ride goes with you, at least for a time, Onesh gestured. The remnant will want to know. We have waited too long for this day. Let us take the paths through Postmore. I have business to deal with there before we continue. Wait, Mare said, his heart racing at the words as he realized he would be alone. He opened his mouth to speak, then swallowed quickly to relieve the dryness. I need you to come back, to explain to the captain what happened. No, you do not, Leonardo said, cutting him off. We all have our tasks, and Trill gave you yours. I can't do this alone, Mare choked, feeling his head go light. Take one of the severed claws and collect a few of their blades, Onesh added. They will give weight to your testimony. And do not be afraid, Leonardo concluded. We don't always choose our tasks. We can choose how to respond to them. This one is given to you for the race of men. But Onesh, Mare trailed off, and the realization finally dawned. Chills went down his spine, down his arms and legs. Sir, you're not... It should be obvious by now, Onesh laughed. And then it struck Mare that the silver gleam in Onesh's eye was not just the moon's reflection. After all, you know the stories. But I thought you all were dead, Mare gasped, feeling the warmth growing in intensity. After the Great War, when you fought. As you can see, we're clearly not, Onish smiled. I am not the only one either, and I am not the last. So when you speak of the stories, I speak of me and mine. I won't see you again, will I? Mare asked after a pause. The feeling of warmth remained, but there was a new pain, yet one that felt manageable. Onish shook his head. This will likely be the last time we speak, Onish confirmed. At least while you are alive. Whether things happen beyond that, I cannot say. These last words I give to you, and I pray you remember them. Though your life has been filled with pain and with tragedy, you still live. As long as you live, there is a purpose to your life, and whether you know it or not, it is your task to find it. If I knew it, I would tell you, but for now, Sergeant, I order you, live. Now ride, Onish said, his voice strong. You may know of the stories, but now's the time to truly know them, for the stories will soon be the only thing to save us. Ride for the race of men, and be the voice that carries the stories of these men as far as they need to go. Ride now for hope, ride now for life, ride in the name of Marin. Up the sails. Onish pulled free a ram's horn and let fly a lingering blast of passion and fury that echoed across the mountains and left Mare speechless. Before the echoes faded, he was mounted and gone, disappearing towards Postmore. Mare lingered a moment longer, and when the spell left his limbs, he turned in the other direction. Onish and Leonardo were gone, out of sight and out of sound, though firmly in memory. The lieutenant's sword was on his back, his own swords were at his side, and a few of the black blades were secured in his bags. War would soon come, death would become common. Fear would grip the hearts of everyone. The enemy would be on the lips of even children. All this he knew, yet as he rode, he knew something else, something he had not known for a while. He knew hope. He knew life because new words echoed in his mind. The Adonari still live. The stories are real. So ends the first chapter of Firebrand Red Horizon. And one of the things that I really wanted to do with this also, with the character of Mare, was I wanted a character that failed, and I wanted a character that didn't just suddenly have this amazing moment of turnaround, this amazing moment of, I had these struggles in the past, now I have this inspiring speech, now suddenly things are awesome. I wanted a character that still failed, but that people still believed in, because how often do we have that time where we'll fail at something and we get this inspiring speech and then we just don't succeed again? And it's frustrating because all the stories, TVs, movies, they just tell us that one inspiring speech should be enough to essentially do whatever we need to do. And that just doesn't always make sense. People are still going to fail. He still has a lot of work that he's got to do in his character. And so much of what we see later on is we'll see that transition happen. We'll see how he really comes more into his own. We see what happens when he does interact with the main characters, and it is so much fun. I have loved Mare's story so incredibly much. But as you can see, we are coming in at almost 1 hour and 15 minutes together, which has been awesome. Don't get me wrong, but I'm going to end with this. If you like this video, I hope that you leave a like, hope you leave a comment, share, just, help the channel grow. Hope you subscribe. And also just, thank you for staying this long. as I said also before, I've got my links to the books in the bottom there, so you can definitely check those out. And yeah, like I said, they're free on Kindle Unlimited, so if you've got that and want to check it out, awesome. Otherwise, um, paperback, hardcover, regular ebook as well. And I've also got book 2. And here's a really interesting thing about this whole story, too. When I first wrote it, it was actually the entirety of book 1 and 2. That was just one book. But then I kept on writing and I kept on finding scenes that I need to add to help either develop character or just develop the plot a little bit better. And it just got longer and longer, and I realized that it would be far too long for one book. But if I had ended it there, then it would be too short for the story I needed to tell. So I decided, pop, just cut it in half. And so Red Horizon and Crimson Shore are essentially the first arc of Firebrand. So to get the full story as it was meant to be, I definitely recommend going with the first 2 books. But with the first book too, I had a lot of fun with ending it, and it really does bring the title Red Horizon to the foreground. So yeah. Otherwise, if this is something that you actually really liked, I would love you to leave that in the comments. Just say, yeah, this was fun. I thought this was, pretty cool. And then I'll continue doing it for the rest of the chapters. I've got lots of material, as you can tell. All together, it ends up being, I believe, 23 chapters. So there's a very fun story. And with chapter 1, we actually get into my main character. His name is Josiah. He was a lot of fun to write, but again, chapter 2 was actually the very first chapter that I had wrote for this story, and then it was after the story had pretty much been done that I added in the beginning parts. In the first part, I just had chapter 1 be the prologue, but then another, comment session, people saying they don't like prologues. If possible, make your prologue chapter 1. And I thought, why not? That fits. So this was a prologue, and now it is not. But yeah, really hope that you enjoyed. This was a lot of fun. I saw a couple people pop in and out. So hopefully you guys check this out later on. And yeah, I just hope you have a most excellent rest of the day. Take care, and I will see you at a later time. Peace.